Good day. I'm Laurence Sanford, Senior Analyst with the American Security Council Foundation. Our mission is to educate and engage Americans on issues of national security, economic security, and moral leadership. Our motto is peace through strength. Today I'm pleased to have with us Ralph Mariani, who is a career CIA case officer and a Defense Department consultant since his retirement. He is here today to talk about the assassination of the chief of station in Athens, Greece, Richard Welch, who was assassinated in 1975. Ralph, why don't you just give a quick background of your education and your service and some of the countries you served in, and then get right into the story of Richard Welch.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Thank you for having me here, too, to talk about Dick Welch. I grew up in Miami, Florida. I'm a Floridian almost by birth. I was born in New Jersey, and so I was a kid in high school and college in Florida. Then I joined I went to graduate school at the University of Kentucky, and then I joined the CIA after one of the recruiters came to campus, and I needed a job really bad. So I've been with the agency and after my consulting career since 1967. My tours included Saudi Arabia, Greece, India, Argentina, Guatemala. Then I was a instructor at our training academy, and then I went to Philippines as deputy chief in the early 90s, and then I finished my career chasing Cubans in Miami. I'm here to discuss with you or talk to you and your viewers about Richard Welch, who he was, his assassination and the aftermath, the effects of the assassination. Dick Welch was a true blue Irishman from Boston, Massachusetts. His father was a very successful, it's Richard Skethington Welch. His father was a successful businessman, had a lot of influence on Wall Street, and in the terrible stock market crash of 29, sorry, his father lost everything. His father reinvented himself as a officer in the U.S. Army. And Dick was born in the early 30s. He joined the agency out of Harvard, which in 1951 was very common. Harvard, Yale, Princeton were incubators for CIA ops officers. The agency didn't have that much diversity at that time, but Dick Welch was one of many Harvard grads, and I'm sure he finished at the very top of his class. He majored in linguistics, and including he learned not native, but formal classical Greek and modern Greek. That's very unusual. Most of our Greek speakers, unless they're Greek Americans at the agency and the State Department, come from a Greek background, because the Greeks were wonderful at teaching their kids not only religious classes, but teaching them the language. But Dick Welch was not a Greek American, but he spoke Greek flawlessly. And his first assignment, naturally, they sent him to Greece. He was there for 7 years with his first wife, and his first 2 out of 3 children were born. He worked on the Soviet target in Greece. It was soon after the Greek Civil War, so I'm sure he was very busy, and he made a name for himself. And he got out, I think he finished in the late 50s, and his next assignment was to Cyprus, naturally, where you also use Greek. And in Cyprus, he met a young officer who had been in Greece in the 50s also, but had been up in northern Greece in Kavala. That gentleman's name is Ron Estes, who plays a key part in our story that you and I are going to be discussing. So Estes, a true blue Marine from Virginia Military Institute, Arlington High School product, meets up with Dick Welch, the Ivy Leaguer, and they became incredibly close friends. As you know, Our agency fosters a lot of close friendships because of the camaraderie, the loyalty, the brotherhood and sisterhood. All of that lead to some really close, and I have some close friends, but I never heard of a friendship like the Estes Welch friendship. And they really hit it off in Cyprus. They were there together for 3 years. They entered chess tournaments and bridge tournaments trying to meet leads they could try to recruit and help the United States. Very successful tours. And then they separated. Ron went to Czechoslovakia, I think, and Dick joined the LA division. He did a rotational.
LA division is Latin America.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Latin America division. Dick learned Spanish, I'm sure, very easily after classical Greek, be a pushover. And he was sent to Guatemala, I think as the deputy chief of station on his 3rd tour. From Guatemala, he went to Georgetown, Guyana. He received kudos in his career there, and I think 2 medals. And then he transferred as the chief of station in Lima, Peru. So that's where he was when he learned he was going back to Greece. Back to the Ron. Ron, of course, went to Czech Republic, and then he found himself, I think, in the Middle East, in Lebanon, working during the very critical time of the early 70s. When Welch and Estes were in Cyprus, probably over a couple of beers, they made a pact, so to speak. It wasn't a blood pact, but it was an ironclad pact that someday they planned on taking over the Athens station. I don't mean by a coup, by normal personnel moves. And that was their goal, to get back to Athens together, where Dick, the slightly more senior of the two, would be the COS and Ron would be the deputy. And sure enough, in the summer of '75, it happened. Ron was serving as the deputy chief of station of Athens. I was at the low on the totem pole, but a happy first ops tour officer. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven being a case officer for the CIA. And Ron was a big influence on me. And Welch came in the summer of '75. And 5 months later, he was assassinated. In order to get to the assassination, I need to go back to 1974, when Welch was working in Lima and Ron was in Athens. And there was what they call the Cyprus crisis, the Nicosia, the attempt by the Greeks to overthrow President Makarios, who was a religious figure, Archbishop Makarios. And the Turks, in reaction to that, invaded the island of Cyprus, and that led to the Greeks having to put their tail between their legs and go back to Greece. It also led to a very good thing, and that was the return of democracy to Greece. After the foul-up of the coup in Cyprus, Greece was returned to democracy, where it's been ever since, happily. I was in Athens the summer of '74. I remember the coup very well. I also know very well, not the coup, sorry, the return to democracy. I also remember very well the positive nature of the return to democracy, the U.S. Embassy's positive reaction to it. I mention that in sort of a defensive way because it's going to come up in a minute or two when we talk about the assassination.
So who assassinated Dick Welch?
Okay, let's talk about it.
And why?
Yeah, sure. And who's responsible for inciting them is another angle on that. In the late 60s, those who are old enough will remember or have studied, in Europe there was a lot of protest movement by radical leftist groups. The focus of these protests and attempts to install leftist regimes in Europe took place in Paris. There was marches, protests, there was some violence. It was a heck of a difficult time for the French in the whole year of '68. As most people who've studied history know, 1968 in general was a horrible year. Assassinations in the United States, the Vietnam War going to a crescendo, and of course this business in Paris. And what was formed in Paris was a radical, and this is important, not a radical leftist group, but a radical Marxist Leninist group. The Marxist Leninist group took the name of 17 November in the early 70s, and the 17 November designation, so that leads us to believe that the creation of 17 November didn't take place right in 68, but it took place probably in 73 or 4. But this group, very small group of leftists, radical leftists from Athens, finally formed a 17 November group, and they named it 17 November because on 17 November of 1973, while the junta, military junta, was still in charge, there was a protest on the streets or the campus of Athens Polytechnic. And it was on 17 November that the local police and military, with military support, stopped the protests, and there were some people killed, students killed. The leftists blamed the CIA for that event, for the killing of the students on 17 November. Obviously, you know how I feel. There's absolutely no evidence of any involvement, any which way, by the CIA or the embassy or the State Department or our Defense Department in what happened on that campus. But 17 November, the group took the point of view that it was the U.S. who sponsored it, and the U.S. who, the CIA, were out there shooting people. God knows how they came to this conclusion, but it's totally false. So now we move forward to 74, and the Greeks, the junta, led by Ioannidis, does their attempt at overthrowing Makarios, and it's a failure. Democracy returns to Greece successfully. Konstantin Karamanlis, who ironically had been in exile in Paris when the junta was in charge, took over as the first democratically elected president, I think, in 20 years. So the military heyday was over. Our relations with the Karamanlis government were good, and of course they were in power in the summer of 75, July, when Dick Welch returned to Greece as the COS of the station. He was the COS for about 5 months. He was assassinated on 23 December 1975. So we're coming up on the 50th anniversary, Larry, in about a year. He obviously was settled in. His Greek was flawless, and he started running the station as it would be. Our main targets were the Soviet Union, Chinese, Poland, Eastern Bloc countries, and that's what I was doing, happily. And on December the 23rd, 1975, Dick Welch and his wife, Kika, second wife, Kika, went off to the ambassador's home about 6:30 for a Christmas cocktail party. He had a driver. He had, I think it was a Ford sedan. I forget the designation of it. It wasn't an armored car. And he went to the party and left the party, and he obviously, now we know, was followed. And he went to his home in Sihiko, which is only about 15 minutes from the embassy. And being the gentleman that he was, he got out of the, he always used to, his routine was the car would go up to the gate, he would get out of the car and open the gate for the driver to drive in, so he didn't have to, the driver didn't have to get out of the car. So Dick Welch got out of the car and went towards the gate to open it, and 3 17 November operatives, I like to call them cowards if you don't mind, pulled out a .45 and shot him twice in the chest, and took off, the 3 of them, in a getaway car. So they either followed from the party, or they knew he had gone out and waited for him to come back. More likely, there was no point in them going to the ambassador's party. Ron Estes, who I've talked about being a close friend of and colleague, extremely close friend, lived up the street. He lived in a temporary apartment. I'm sorry, his fiancée lived up the street in a temporary apartment, and he was there for dinner. The driver knew he was at that house for dinner, and the driver hurried up to the house. Seriously, it's 1 minute drive, and told Ron and his fiancée that the chief that Mr. Welch had been shot. Ron ran straight out of the house, being the Marine that he is or was. I say was because he just died 2 days ago. He died on Sunday morning in St. Augustine.
Once a Marine, always a Marine.
Definitely, he's still a Marine.
Yeah.
He's just in a different brigade now. But obviously, as you can tell, I think the world of Ron Estes, and certainly I do of Welch. But back to the scene was awful. He was bleeding profusely. Ron literally cuddled Mr. Welch in his arms, and he tells the story on his podcast that he's done for AFIO. He tells the story how he knew immediately from his days in Korea that Mr. Welch would not make it. He would be gone past very soon because of the smell of the blood, is what the way Ron describes it. The driver was distraught. Needless to say, his wife Kika was distraught, and the police came, and Ron wisely, incredible how you think when you're in trouble, put Kika in the car, Mr. Welch's car, to go to the hospital, but not in the same car as the body of Welch, because he didn't want Kika to experience the final moments as he bled out. It would have been a horrible scene. So they got to the hospital. I think it was about a 5-minute drive away. Press was already there. They must have heard the radio signals from the police. And he was declared dead on the night of the 23rd of December, 1975, and we're all coming up on the 50th anniversary. I told you a little bit about myself. I guess I should add that this event and the surrounding events to it and the personalities and the groups involved are something that I spend a lot of time ruminating over and also studying and researching, and I have it as a plan is to honor Mr. Welch a bit more than he has been. I don't think he's been honored and remembered as much as he should have been next year on the 50th anniversary. So that's the story of the death of Richard Welch.
And so what happened as far as the perpetrators of this violent crime?
Well, I think I should mention before I get into what happened to the 17th November is who's responsible. We know that 17 November was responsible, but what led them to pick Dick Welch? Why a COS? And as many of you know, the CIA and the KGB, French service, Italian service, all intel services sort of have an unwritten rule. We don't shoot each other. We try to out-manipulate each other, bamboozle. Most intel services, good ones, are practitioners of bamboozling and manipulating and lying occasionally to our targets, not to our country. So I hold, Larry, I want to mention this to you, I hold the junta who was responsible for the taking down of the students in November of '73. I hold them responsible because they fostered, after the failure of their coup against Cyprus, they fostered a feeling of planting articles in newspapers, getting propaganda out there, that it was the Americans who let down the Greeks. It wasn't the junta who let down the Greeks.
But the KGB, the Soviets, all through its history, have planted articles in newspapers and blaming the Americans for
different things,
AIDS and everything else.
Well, the effort that went into framing the coup and blaming the United States is something that you had to be there and read the press and read the aftermath and the history to know that things were set up so that the blame went to the United States. And of course, if you're blaming the United States for the failure of a coup, you're blaming the CIA. And if you wanted to get an example or get a martyr or a victim of that, you kill the CIA station chief. They didn't adhere to the rules. 17 November did not adhere to the rules of the KGB and the CIA and the DGI in Cuba. and so they shot dead Mr. Welch. And the aftermath, incredibly, I sit here amazed, I'm still amazed by this, that from 1975 to 2002, 17 November was on the lam. Is that correct?
That's a good word.
Yeah, on the lam. And they weren't on the lam in a cave in Afghanistan like bin Laden was. They weren't hiding in the Sudan behind a cactus tree. They were hiding in plain sight. They were in Athens. They were in the suburbs of Athens. They never went hiding. They didn't have to get the help of anyone. It was a very small group. We figure between 15 and 30 members of 17 November's group. And I mention that because those of us who are defensive about losing our bosses and our colleagues have never quite understood why there was a failure on the part of Greek law enforcement and their intel services to bring down this small terrorist group. Not even one solid, as far as I know, and I'll get into the whole idea of a task force, lead, not one arrest. There was just a lot of pretending going on by the Greeks because we, the United States, had set up in our headquarters in Virginia, we had set up a task force. There was a unit out at the station working on this topic of investigating. And the task force, our task force, included the DOD, included the FBI, because this was an American citizen who was killed, so it's the FBI's jurisdiction. And we got along very well with the FBI. They literally, obviously cooperated. Who didn't cooperate were the Greek intel services and the Greek law enforcement. Now, if somebody interprets what I'm saying as crying wolf, well, look it up. 27 years, 23 members, and here's the incredible part, second part. They victimized another 23 victims. After Welch in December of '75, there was a series of Americans, 2 Air Force attaches, 1 enlisted male clerk, Air Force officer, who was at the base working on mail for the Air Force. He was killed in an IED. The two military attaches were killed, one with an IED, one with a pistol, the same 45. They used the 45 for all their killings. The rest of them, there was 2 Turkish diplomats assassinated on the streets of Athens, again in plain sight. They weren't out in the woods fishing or hunting. Shot in the streets of Athens. Then finally, the last victim in 2001, I believe, or 2000, was Colonel Sanders of the British Army attaché, or the head attaché of the British Embassy, military attaché. Sanders was killed in Kolonaki Square. As an example, and this is documented. The embassy was about 15, 20 minutes walk from the embassy. And the embassy, they heard over the radio there had been a shooting in Kolonaki Square, and that it was because it was so close to the British embassy that it was a British embassy person who was killed. It was a motor scooter coming up to the side of Sanders' truck and shooting him dead. So somebody in the embassy decided, let's get somebody over there to see the situation. They figure between the embassy and the scene of the assassination, a walk of 15 to 20 minutes from the actual time of the killing, maybe another 5 minutes. Anyway, when our observer, we'll call him, got to the scene in Kolonaki Square, which is a big sort of Tony type of, with special cafes and high-end stores. When they got to Kolonaki Square, the scene had already been cleared. There was no scene. They had swept up, got the traffic moving again around. Can you imagine something like that happening anywhere else in the world, including Africa, Far East, you name it? You have to have an investigation. You have to have a scene blocked off, especially when it's a foreign diplomat or attaché in this case. But that's the way they operated. They weren't interested or had the will to stop 17 November. Because I think, now we get into personal opinions, I hope I'm allowed one, I think that there was a protection going on. I certainly am not accusing the Greek government of killing an attaché or killing a Turkish diplomat. And of course not. It's not the Greek government. It was 17 November. But there must have been something about 17 November, and while it was in Paris forming, they didn't keep tabs on it enough. Needless to say, the Greeks have special relations with the French, just like we do, and the Belgians. I mean, it's the European Union. So there was obviously no success by the Greek government of getting help from the French to stop 17 November. And now we get into their bloodbath in Greece for 27 years. And I don't think they wanted it kept out there that it was the Americans' fault. And that's what led to the Welch assassination, because the Americans had failed them in Cyprus in July of '74. I can't emphasize enough this lack of will. One aspect of it, just my own little analysis, is probably not that good, but of the 27 years, 16 of the years, a politician by the name of Andreas Papandreou was the prime minister of Greece. He was a leftist, he was a socialist, a democratic socialist, and I have no problem with socialists, I have no problem with democratic socialists. I do have a problem with Marxist Leninists. But Papandreou, whose father was overthrown by the junta in 1964, always blamed the Americans. Papandreou, ironically, was an American citizen. His mother was a Minnesotan. That's the right word. And so, but he hated the United States and he hated the CIA. And it's my contention those 16 of the 27 years, I'm sure that Greek intel services and Greek law enforcement didn't have it at the top of their list to walk into Prime Minister Papandreou's office and announce they just made the Americans happy by stopping 17 November.
I agree with that assessment, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. But again, it's not the sort of thing you prove in a court of law. Interestingly, I think it sort of makes sense to go back and I'm not a Greek historian, but I know a lot about Greek history. Greece has never been the type of a place for terrorism. It doesn't have a history of political assassination. It doesn't have a history of assassinations. I mean, the Greeks, and I am a card-carrying Grecophile, are known for their hospitality. They look down at terrorism. Who doesn't? That's the way it is. But in this case, they sort of, I don't want to say swept under the rug, but they lived with this. Victim after victim after victim. You can only imagine the carnage and their IEDs were huge. I mean, I'm not going to get into the details, but really, really horrific. So, what happens? They're finally caught in 2001 in Piraeus, which is sort of the port of Athens, in an apartment building on whatever floor it was. There was a 17 November bomb maker. What a nice occupation, huh? He's making his bomb and he made a mistake. And he blew his hand off. Neighbors called 911. There's been an explosion in the building. They get there, he's down for the count, and he's arrested, and he speaks up when he's under arrest and identifies, he admits he's 17 November and identifies other members. They're rounded up, and they go to jail, and they plan a trial to end all trials. Took place in 2002. Welch's 3 children were invited. Other victims' families were invited. It was a circus. The shooter, the main shooter, the leader of the party, he couldn't be charged with murder because of the statute of limitations. Because since the Welch assassination to 2002, too much time had elapsed. So he got a life sentence. 4 or 5 others got life sentences. It was a chaotic scene when they had to choose somebody to make a victim statement. What's it called? Victims support statement, how it felt to lose a family member. The Air Force attaché's daughter spoke in his memory, and it was extremely emotional. I'm told it was articulate, emotional, and during her talk, members of 17 November, where they were in the docket or in their seats, made fun of her, making nasty comments, nasty signs. That's how and the judge just let it happen. They went to jail. Most of them are still in jail. After about 5 years, we had another interesting thing happen where one of them escaped, and stayed in Greece, went out to one of the suburbs, and a year later, he didn't change his name. Why should he change his name? You don't have to worry about getting caught in Greece. He was riding his bicycle and something happened and he hit a woman or some altercation to call for the police. And the policeman realized, oh, this is so-and-so. He's supposed to be in jail for killing Dick Welch. So that's how, in true name, took a year to find the guy who escaped. So you can tell by my tone that I'm quite angry to this day that it took so long to bring down 17 November. I should have said, I told you about the Americans, I told you about the Air Force, I told you about the 2 naval attachés, the British attaché and the 2 Turks. Then guess what? There's 15 Greek citizens who were assassinated and murdered by 17 November. Greek citizens, publishers and politicians. Obviously not social democrats, but New Democracy people who believed. But so that in addition to the foreigners being killed, we had 15 Greek citizens killed. They're still in jail to this day. My contention is, and it bothers me a great deal, as you all can tell, is that Dick Welch needs to be remembered in a better way. Our task force that we had set up did a great job. I was part of it twice I was part of it. I know what they were doing. They just weren't getting cooperation. They were getting, what's the word? Run around the circle. It was nothing substantive would happen, no matter what the Americans tried.
Whitewash is a good word.
Whitewash, thank you very much. I don't like shove under the carpet. I like whitewash better. It was a classic whitewash, and they got away with it. So my contention is that Welch and the others, the Americans especially, and the Welch-Estes relationship, and again I mentioned he died Sunday morning in St. Augustine at the age of 93. That has to be highlighted. I think it's one of the great couples or relationships, professional relationships, personal relationships, and they couldn't be more different. Couldn't have been more different. But it's wonderful about the fraternity of intelligence workers or police or responders. These relationships are fostered. That's where we stand. I'm hoping to have a few things to do for the 50th anniversary. I'm working on 2 or 3 projects involving the media, so we can hopefully honor Mr. Welch and remember him as he should be remembered. He's a wonderful. He was. By the way, I didn't mention. I'll speak for his 3 children. Just a wonderful father, tremendous role model, very intellectual. Very intellectual. He wasn't the kind of guy that listened to the Beatles. He listened to Beethoven, and and he made a tremendous ops officer. And we miss him all the time. We still miss him. That's my story.
Well, thank you, Ralph. That
Any
was a
questions?
great story. That's a great story. I would note to our listeners that Ralph is involved with AFIO, the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, and they're working with him to foster this additional tribute for Welch. And I would further note that the president of American Security Council, Dr. Henry Fisher, is an AFIO member since the very origins, and his membership numbers in the 1,000 range, as opposed to the current numbers, which are up in the thousands. So,
well, AFIO is a very special organization. It means a lot to me because it's substantive. It's not just social. And they've been very supportive. They have archives where they keep a lot of the stuff that I've worked on, tapes, etc. And in fact, there's an article on this assassination that was in the February journal, their journal. It's called The Intelligencer. But if you Google Richard S. Welch, or just Richard Welch, and by the way, it's Welch with a C, W-E-L-C-H. If you Google that and put after Google AFIO, Association of Former Intelligence Officers, just putting Welch and AFIO will get you the article that started this whole project that I'm working on. It's about 3 years old now, and means a lot to my colleagues that we got that done by AFIO.
Yes, I would add that I'm the president of the local AFIO chapter here in Melbourne, Florida. And so you were formally extended an invitation to address our group. We've had a series of great speakers, former intelligence officers, military people. And so you certainly would fit into the tradition we have at AFIO here in Melbourne. So you're invited. So let me know.
Oh, yeah. Listen, Larry's a great president, and we have luncheons. But to have this opportunity, and I hope to have more opportunities in the next year and a half, to speak about Dick Welch is special. He's a tremendous intellect, a tremendous scholar, and a patriot, a very brave patriot who gave his life for his country. There's nothing like that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you very much.
And
Thanks for
thank you,
having me.
listeners. Just a reminder that American Security Council Foundation depends upon donations, so your help is always appreciated. And we will post this podcast on Rumble and YouTube and on our website. So please feel free to contact us with any questions or suggestions. And thank you very much for viewing us here at the Peace Through Strength American Security Council podcast. Thank you.